What happens when a picture-perfect life explodes? Catherine Bell was living a fairy tale. Married to the charismatic tech millionaire Alistair Finch, pregnant with their first child and living in a mansion that overlooked the ocean. Then during one lavish dinner with a single ice-cold sentence, Alistair ended it all. He wanted a divorce, effective immediately. A stunned pregnant Catherine was left alone in their palace of glass and stone. But what happened next is something no one, least of all Alistair, could have ever predicted. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of an alliance forged in the fire of heartbreak and a fight for justice that would shake an empire to its core. The crystal glasses on the table at Perse were so fine, Catherine Bell was almost afraid to touch them. They seemed to hum with the quiet, expensive energy of the room, a 3-Michelin-star temple of gastronomy overlooking Columbus Circle. Each plate that arrived was a work of art, a miniature sculpture of foam gelée and impossibly fresh ingredients. It was all so perfect. Too perfect. Catherine shifted in her plush velvet chair, the silk of her emerald green maternity dress whispering against the fabric. At 5 months pregnant, she was just beginning to show a gentle, happy curve that she would often rest her hand upon, a silent promise of the future. She smiled across the table at her husband, Alistair Finch. To the outside world, Alistair was a titan. At 38, he was the founder and CEO of Nexus Dynamics, a tech firm that had revolutionized data logistics. His face, with its sharp jawline, intense blue eyes, and perpetually confident smirk, had graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. He moved with an economy of motion, a man who believed every second of his time was worth $1,000. To Catherine, for the past 4 years, he had been the architect of her world. "Is the oysters and pearls to your liking, my love?" Alistair asked, though he didn't look up from his phone. He was scrolling through market data, his thumb moving with practiced speed. "It's incredible," she said, her voice soft. "Everything is. Thank you for this." He finally locked the phone and placed it face down on the pristine white tablecloth, a gesture that was meant to signify his complete attention, but felt more like a temporary ceasefire. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the pale gold liquid. "Catherine," he began, his tone shifting. The warmth that had been there, however faint, evaporated, replaced by the cool, clipped cadence he used in the boardroom. "We need to discuss the future." A thrill of excitement shot through her. Were they finally going to talk about baby names, nurseries? The trip to Tuscany he'd promised for their baby moon. "I'd love to," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I was thinking, if it is a boy, maybe we could honor your father, Michael." Alistair blinked, as if her words were in a foreign language he couldn't be bothered to translate. "No, not that. I'm talking about our future, yours and mine, separately." The air in Catherine's lungs turned to ice. The distant chatter of the restaurant, the gentle clinking of cutlery, all of it faded into a dull, roaring hum in her ears. Separately. What? "What are you talking about, Alistair?" He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated impatience, as if she were a slow employee failing to grasp a simple concept. "I've instructed my lawyer, Mr. Davies, to draw up the divorce papers. They are for all intents and purposes finalized. I wanted to tell you here in a civilized manner before they are served to you at the house tomorrow. Divorce." The word felt alien on her tongue, a jagged stone. "No. You're joking. This is a joke, a horrible, cruel joke." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She looked into his eyes, searching for the man she loved, the man who had whispered promises to her under Egyptian cotton sheets, who had held her hand during the first ultrasound, but she found only a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger. "I am not joking, Catherine. I am never more serious than when it comes to practicalities," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Our marriage is no longer a viable partnership. My circumstances have changed. My needs have changed." "Your circumstances?" Her voice trembled, a mixture of confusion and rising panic. I'm pregnant, Alistair. I am carrying our child. How have your circumstances possibly changed more than that? He had the audacity to look bored. The pregnancy is a complication, I admit, but not an insurmountable one. The child will be provided for. Extravagantly. I have stipulated a very, very generous trust. You in turn will be compensated according to the prenuptial agreement. It's quite ironclad, as I'm sure you'll recall. The prenup. A document she had signed in a haze of love and trust, a 20-page monstrosity his lawyer had slid in front of her a week before their wedding. Alistair had called it a simple corporate formality. She hadn't even read it closely. She had trusted him. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. Why? Just tell me why. Is it someone else? He considered the question for a moment as if weighing the strategic pros and cons of telling the truth. That is an oversimplification of a complex situation, he said finally. But yes, there is someone else. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's a business associate. She understands the world I live in, the pressures, the demands. Isabella Rossi. The name struck Catherine like a physical blow. A stunning, raven-haired Italian heiress and venture capitalist who had been circling Alistair's company for months. Catherine had met her once at a charity gala. Isabella had looked straight through her, her eyes dismissing Catherine as a pretty but ultimately irrelevant accessory. So what, you just discard me? The words were barely a whisper. 4 years. Our baby. It means nothing. It means that it has run its course, Alistair said, placing his napkin on the table. He stood up, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. The car will take you home. I have another engagement. The papers will arrive around 10 a.m. I would advise you to have a lawyer present, though it will make little difference to the outcome. He didn't lean in to kiss her. He didn't touch her shoulder. He simply turned and walked away, a king leaving his court, never once looking back. Catherine sat there alone at the table for two, surrounded by the debris of a multi-thousand-dollar meal she could no longer eat. The waiter approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, madam?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod, a single jerky motion. The tears she had been holding back began to fall, tracing cold paths down her cheeks, dripping onto the pristine silk of her dress. She was no longer Catherine Bell, wife of a millionaire. She was a complication, a partnership that was no longer viable. The ride home to their sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate was a blur of streetlights and silent sobs. The house, usually a symbol of their shared success and happiness, felt like a mausoleum. It was vast, cold, and achingly empty. Every photo on the wall of them laughing in Bali, skiing in Aspen, celebrating their anniversary, was a monument to a lie. She walked into the master bedroom, a space larger than the apartment she'd grown up in. Alistair's side of the closet was already empty. His valet had been here. It had all been planned. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a corporate extraction executed with chilling precision. She spent the night curled in a guest room, unable to bear the scent of him on their sheets. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, one hand on her belly, feeling the faint fluttering movements of the life inside her. It was the only thing that felt real in a world that had just been shattered into a million pieces. She was alone, pregnant, and about to be divorced by a man who treated her like a defunct asset to be liquidated. Morning came not with sunlight, but with a gray, drizzling rain that matched the despair in her soul. She sat in the cavernous living room, staring out at the manicured lawns that rolled down towards the Long Island Sound. She felt nothing. She was a ghost in her own life. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell chimed, a sound as sharp and final as a guillotine's fall. She thought it was the courier with the divorce papers, the final nail in the coffin of her marriage. Her body tensed, preparing for the next wave of pain. She opened the massive oak door. It wasn't a courier. Standing on the rain-slicked flagstone porch, flanked by two large Louis Vuitton suitcases, was Eleanor Finch, Alistair's mother. Eleanor was a woman carved from New England granite and old money. Tall, impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat with her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, she possessed an aura of formidable authority. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her son's, held a look that was not pity, but something far more complex, a fierce, unyielding resolve. Catherine stared at her confused. They had a cordial but distant relationship. Eleanor was polite but always kept a certain emotional distance, as if observing Catherine from behind a pane of glass. "Eleanor," Catherine stammered. What are you doing here?" Eleanor Finch looked past Catherine into the cold, opulent foyer of the house her son had built. Then her gaze returned to Catherine, softening just slightly as it rested on the small swell of her stomach. "I heard what my son did," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the damp morning air. "He is a fool and a coward. So I packed my bags." She took a step forward, crossing the threshold and bringing the scent of rain and expensive perfume into the house. "If you'll have me," Eleanor Finch declared, "I'm moving in." For a long moment, Catherine could only stare. Eleanor Finch, standing in the marble-floored foyer of the home her son had just ripped from Catherine's life, was an impossible apparition. The woman who had always treated her with a polite, almost clinical distance, who sent perfectly chosen impersonal gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, was now standing amidst her designer luggage with the defiant air of a general occupying enemy territory. Catherine's mind, fogged with grief and exhaustion, struggled to process the scene. Was this a trick, a Trojan horse sent by Alistair to manage the situation to ensure she signed the papers without a fuss? The Finch family, she was learning, operated on a level of strategy she was only just beginning to comprehend. "Move in," Catherine finally managed, her voice hoarse. "Eleanor, with all due respect, I don't understand. You're his mother." "And you are the mother of my grandchild," Eleanor retorted, her gaze unwavering. "That is a blood tie, my dear. A biological fact. A marriage certificate, as you have so brutally discovered, is merely a contract. And my son has just demonstrated what he thinks of contracts." She stepped further into the house, her sharp eyes scanning the cavernous, impersonal space. It was a show home decorated by a high-priced designer Alistair had hired, filled with modern art he'd bought as an investment and furniture that was more sculpture than comfort. It was a reflection of Alistair himself, impressive, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. "May I have some tea?" Eleanor asked, already shrugging off her cashmere coat. "Earl Grey if you have it. And I suggest you have some chamomile. It will be good for you. And for the baby." It wasn't a request. It was a gentle command. Numbly, Catherine led the way to the state-of-the-art kitchen, a vast expanse of stainless steel and Italian marble that she had never truly felt comfortable in. As she filled the kettle, her hands trembling, Eleanor surveyed the room with a critical eye. "This kitchen is absurd," she commented, running a finger along a sterile countertop. "It's designed for caterers, not for people. No soul." Catherine turned, leaning against the counter, her resolve crumbling. "Why are you really here, Eleanor? Did he send you to what? Make sure I don't make a scene?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's composed expression finally softened, and for the first time Catherine saw a flicker of the woman behind the formidable facade. She saw a deep, weary sadness in her eyes. "Alistair did not send me," Eleanor said, her voice losing its crisp edge, becoming something more intimate. "In fact, he would be incandescent with rage if he knew I was here. I imagine he will be soon enough. I telephoned him this morning after I heard the news from a friend on the board of his company. The Isabella Rossi situation is apparently common knowledge in their circle." She said the name with a quiet, venomous disdain. "I told him," Eleanor continued, "that if he went through with this cruelty, he would not be just divorcing his wife. He would be severing his relationship with his mother. He called my bluff. He told me I was being overly sentimental. So I am here." The kettle began to whistle, a shrill scream in the quiet house. Catherine poured the hot water into 2 mugs, her mind still reeling. "But why?" Catherine whispered, handing a mug to her mother-in-law. "He's your son, your only child." Eleanor took the mug and led the way to a small, uncomfortable-looking sofa in the adjacent living area. She sat down perfectly poised and patted the seat next to her. Catherine hesitated for a second before sinking into the cushion. "Catherine, I am going to tell you something I have not spoken of in over 20 years. Eleanor began, her gaze fixed on the gray, rain-lashed view outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I am going to tell you about Michael Finch, Alistair's father. The man was a legend, a Wall Street phantom who had built a colossal fortune in the 80s and died of a sudden heart attack on his yacht in Monaco when Alistair was just a teenager. Alistair rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a mixture of reverence and rivalry. Michael, like Alistair, was brilliant, Eleanor said. He was charming, magnetic. When he focused his attention on you, it felt like standing in the sun. I was young, from a good family, but with little money of my own. I was utterly bewitched. We married, and he gave me a beautiful life. A house much like this one Jules Travel. And a son." She paused, taking a slow sip of her tea. "For 15 years, I believed I was the happiest woman in the world. And then one evening he came home, sat me down in our library, and told me he had met someone else. A younger woman. He informed me that our marriage was over and that his lawyers had an agreement for me to sign. It was non-negotiable." Catherine stared at her, speechless. The parallel was uncanny, a chilling echo down the decades. "I was a fool," Eleanor continued, her voice laced with the memory of old pain. "I had no resources of my own. I had signed a prenuptial agreement just like you did without truly understanding what it meant. I was completely dependent on him. He told me I could have the house and a comfortable allowance provided I was discreet. If I fought him, he would cut me off entirely and paint me as an unstable shrew in the press. I was trapped. I had a teenage son to think about." "What did you do?" Catherine breathed. "I signed the papers," Eleanor said, a flash of fire in her eyes. "I took the deal, and I hated myself for it every single day. I smiled at society functions, raised my son, and maintained the facade of the dignified ex-wife. But inside I was hollowed out. Michael died 2 years later, and his fortune, the bulk of it, went to his new wife. Alistair and I were left with a trust fund that, while substantial, was a pittance compared to his true wealth." She turned to face Catherine fully. "I watched my son grow up idolizing a man who was a brilliant monster. I tried to teach him empathy, to instill in him a sense of decency, to warn him against becoming his father. I thought I had succeeded. I see now that I failed. The worst parts of Michael didn't die with him. They lay dormant in Alistair, and his success has watered them, made them grow. What he is doing to you, it is not just an echo of his father. It is a perfect, monstrous replication." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't pity. This was a reckoning. Eleanor wasn't just here for Catherine. She was here for the ghost of her younger self, for the woman who had been forced to surrender. A single fat tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. He said I was no longer a viable partnership. That is Michael's language." Eleanor spat, her composure finally breaking into raw anger. "Cold, transactional, cruel. He is erasing you just as his father erased me. But this time is different." "How?" Catherine asked, her voice thick with despair. "The prenup. He said it's ironclad." "There is no such thing as an ironclad agreement when a man is hiding his true worth and acting in bad faith," Eleanor declared. "And more importantly, this time, there are 2 of us. And I am no longer a frightened, financially dependent girl. I have my own money, my own connections. And you," she said, her eyes falling to Catherine's stomach, "have the ultimate leverage. You carry the Finch legacy, not Isabella Rossi. You." Just then the doorbell chimed again, a different sound this time, sharper, more insistent. Both women froze. "That will be the papers," Catherine whispered, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over her. Eleanor stood up, her back ramrod straight. "I'll get it." She walked to the door and opened it. A young man in a courier's uniform stood there, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "For Catherine Bell," he said. "I will take it." Eleanor said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She signed the device, took the portfolio, and shut the door. She walked back into the living room and placed the document on the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft final thud. It was embossed with the logo of a prestigious, ruthless law firm. Catherine stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. All the fight that had begun to stir in her withered. "It's over," she said, her voice flat. "He's won." "Nonsense." Eleanor snapped, her energy galvanizing the room. She picked up her phone from her purse. "This is not an ending. This is the beginning of a negotiation, and we will not be using a lawyer Alistair would expect. We will not be using a lawyer from his world at all." She scrolled through her contacts, her painted fingernail tapping decisively on the screen. "When my husband left me, I was given a list of appropriate legal representatives. Quiet, dignified men who would manage my surrender gracefully. But there was one name I heard whispered, a woman they told me to avoid at all costs. They called her a shark, a bulldog. They said she was unladylike in her tactics." A slow smile spread across Eleanor Finch's face, a genuinely predatory, beautiful thing. "I have kept her number for 22 years, hoping I would never need it. It seems I was saving it for you." She pressed the call button. "Yes, hello," she said, her voice pure steel. "My name is Eleanor Finch. I am calling on behalf of my daughter-in-law, Catherine Bell. We need to book a consultation with Ms. Juliana Hayes. Yes, I'm aware of her hourly rate. That will not be a problem. We'll be there this afternoon." Juliana Hayes's office was not in the expected glass tower in Midtown. Instead, it occupied the top floor of a renovated cast-iron building in Soho, a neighborhood of art galleries and fashion boutiques. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that felt more like a modern art installation than a law firm. The walls were stark white, adorned with large, aggressive, abstract paintings in black and red. The furniture was minimalist, uncomfortable-looking, and brutally chic. There was no soothing music, only the low hum of the city outside. It was a space that did not offer comfort. It demanded respect. A young man with an impossibly sharp haircut and an all-black suit greeted them. "Ms. Finch, Ms. Bell. Ms. Hayes will see you now." He led them down a hallway to a corner office with panoramic windows, and there, standing against the backdrop of the New York skyline like a general surveying her battlefield, was Juliana Hayes. She was not what Catherine had expected. She was in her late 40s, petite and wiry, dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue dress that was both severe and stylish. Her dark hair was cut in a severe geometric bob that framed a face with high cheekbones and intelligent dissecting eyes. She didn't smile as they entered. She simply watched them, her expression a neutral mask of assessment. "Eleanor," Juliana said, her voice a low, precise alto. "It has been a long time. I'm sorry for the circumstances." She gestured towards the two chairs opposite her large, uncluttered glass desk. "Please." As they sat, Juliana's gaze shifted to Catherine. It wasn't unkind, but it was intensely analytical, as if she were scanning Catherine for weaknesses. "Mrs. Bell." She began using the formal address Eleanor has given me, the broad strokes. "Your husband, Alistair Finch, has served you with a proposal for dissolution of marriage. You are 5 months pregnant with his child. He has, I presume, offered you the bare minimum stipulated in your prenuptial agreement." Catherine, feeling small and exposed in the powerful room, could only nod. "He called it generous." A dry, almost silent laugh escaped Juliana's lips. "Men like Alistair Finch always do. They believe their table scraps are a feast for the rest of us. May I see the documents?" Eleanor slid the leather-bound portfolio across the vast expanse of the glass desk. For the next 20 minutes, silence descended upon the room, broken only by the whisper of pages turning. Juliana read with terrifying focus, her eyes scanning line after line. Occasionally she would make a small note on a legal pad with a silver pen, her handwriting as sharp and precise as her appearance. Catherine felt her anxiety build with every passing second. She watched Juliana's face for any sign of hope, but the lawyer's expression remained unreadable. Finally, Juliana reached the last page, closed the portfolio, and folded her hands on top of it. She looked directly at Catherine. "This," she said, tapping the portfolio, "is a work of art, a masterpiece of legal warfare designed to leave you with absolutely nothing." The bluntness of the statement hit Catherine like a physical blow. "Mr. Davies, his lawyer, is very good at his job." Juliana continued, her tone clinical. "The agreement you signed is a fortress. Every clause is designed to strip you of any claim to marital assets. It defines marital property so narrowly that the only thing you are likely entitled to is a fraction of the value of the furniture. It waives your right to spousal support beyond a token time-limited amount. It attributes the vast increase in his net worth during your marriage solely to pre-existing business interests, effectively shielding his entire empire from you. On paper, it is, as your husband likely told you, ironclad." Eleanor leaned forward. "But—" Juliana's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. "But fortresses have cracks, and masterpieces can be flawed. This document, for all its technical brilliance, has two fundamental weaknesses." She held up one finger. "One, fraudulent inducement. Eleanor, when you signed your agreement with Michael, was it presented to you as a non-negotiable condition of marriage with little time for independent review?" "Yes," Eleanor said instantly. "It was positioned as a mere formality a week before the wedding. I was told that to question it was to question his love." Juliana looked at Catherine. "And you?" Catherine thought back to the haze of her engagement. "The same. Exactly the same. Alistair said it was something his board of directors required. His lawyer, Mr. Davies, was there. He was very charming. He explained it was just to protect the company. I had a lawyer, but he was a friend of my father's who handled real estate. He was completely out of his depth. He advised me to sign it." "Of course he did," Juliana said with a sigh. "We will argue that you were coerced, that you were not given adequate time or competent independent counsel, and that the terms were so unconscionable as to be unenforceable. It's a difficult argument to win, but it creates a nuisance. It muddies the water." She held up a second finger. "Weakness number 2 is far more significant. Full and frank financial disclosure. A prenuptial agreement is only valid if both parties accurately disclose their assets at the time of signing. More importantly, in a divorce proceeding, both parties are required to disclose their current assets. Men like Alistair Finch and his father before him do not like disclosure. They build their empires in the shadows. They use shell corporations' offshore accounts and tangled webs of trusts to hide their true worth. They present one picture to the IRS, another to the SEC, and a third, much smaller one, to their divorcing wives." Her voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial exciting. "Our job is not to attack the prenup head-on. Our job is to demand a forensic accounting of every single penny Alistair Finch has. We will subpoena his company, his partners, his investment managers. We will make the process of disclosure so invasive, so expensive, and so potentially revealing of things he does not want revealed that his ironclad agreement suddenly becomes a very heavy anchor." Catherine felt a flicker of hope, the first she'd felt in what seemed like an eternity. "You think he's hiding money?" Juliana laughed again, a sharp metallic sound. "My dear, a man worth $1 billion on paper is almost certainly worth $2 or $3 billion in reality. The question is not if he's hiding it. The question is where." She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. "Which brings us to the child." Her gaze softened for the first time as she looked at Catherine's stomach. "This is not just a divorce anymore. This is a matter of child support and inheritance. The state of Connecticut has guidelines for child support, but those guidelines become suggestions when dealing with high net worth individuals. We will argue that this child is entitled to a lifestyle commensurate with his father's true wealth, not a trust fund controlled by Alistair, but direct, substantial, court-ordered support. We will demand private school security nannies, dedicated housing, travel. We will create a budget for this child that will make his eyes water. But more than that," she went on, her eyes locking with Eleanor's. "This child is the Finch heir, the only carrier of his bloodline. This makes his affair with Isabella Rossi look not just callous but foolish. He is discarding the mother of his legacy for a temporary amusement. We will not say this in court, of course, but we will make sure it is understood in the court of public opinion and in the boardrooms of his company." The scope of it, the sheer aggression, was terrifying and exhilarating. This was not a legal dispute. It was war waged with subpoenas and forensic accountants instead of soldiers. "Now," Juliana said, her tone shifting back to business, "this will be a brutal, ugly, and very public fight. Alistair will not play fair. He will hire private investigators. They will dig into your past, your family, your friends. They will try to paint you as a gold digger, an unstable, hysteric, and unfit mother. They will leak stories to the press. Are you prepared for that?" she asked, her eyes boring into Catherine. Catherine looked at her hands, then at Eleanor, whose face was a mask of grim determination. She thought of Alistair's cold, dismissive face at the restaurant. She thought of him calling their baby a complication. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to burn in her chest. "What do you need me to do?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet but firm. A slow, satisfied smile finally graced Juliana Hayes's lips. It transformed her face, making her look like the shark the old guard lawyers whispered about. "Good," she said. "First, you and Eleanor will go back to that house, and you will not leave. It is your marital home. Do not let him intimidate you into leaving. From this moment on, all communication goes through me. You do not speak to him. You do not answer his calls. If he shows up, you do not let him in. You call me." She slid a notebook and the silver pen across the desk to Catherine. "Second, you will start a journal. Document everything. Every interaction you've ever had concerning finances. Every promise he ever made. Every conversation about the baby. Dates, times, locations, details. His casual mention of buying a private island, the small loan he gave to a friend, the antique watch he bought that was worth more than a car. These are the threads we will pull. Third," she said, looking at Eleanor, "you know the world he comes from, the people, the places. We need to find his pressure points. A board member who values family. An old rival who would love to see him stumble. We need leverage outside the courtroom." Juliana stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My retainer is $100,000. Eleanor has assured me this is not an issue. We will begin discovery immediately. This will be a long road, Catherine. But I promise you this, by the time we are done, Alistair Finch will learn that a viable partnership is a two-way street, and that his complication is about to become the most expensive problem he has ever had." Leaving the office and stepping back into the Soho streets, Catherine felt different. The fog of grief had not lifted, but it was pierced by a single sharp beam of light. She was no longer a victim adrift in the wreckage of her life. She was a client, a combatant. Alongside her formidable mother-in-law, she had just hired a shark, and they were going hunting. Returning to the Greenwich estate was a profoundly different experience. The house was no longer a cold, lonely mausoleum of a failed marriage. With Eleanor Finch striding through its halls, it had become a fortress, a command center. The air, once thick with Catherine's despair, now crackled with purpose. A siege was coming, and they were preparing the ramparts. That very afternoon, a locksmith summoned by Eleanor arrived and discreetly changed every lock on the property. The household staff, a chef, a housekeeper, and a groundskeeper, all hired and paid by Alistair, were politely but firmly given 2 weeks of paid leave. "We need privacy," Eleanor had told them, her tone brokering no argument. She then arranged for groceries to be delivered, and to Catherine's astonishment began methodically and expertly cleaning the soulless kitchen herself. "When you are at war," Eleanor stated, wiping down a marble surface with a vigor that belied her age and station, "you control your supply lines and you eliminate potential spies. Alistair pays their salaries. Their loyalty is to him." For Catherine, this new reality was disorienting but grounding. The overwhelming grief still washed over her in waves, but now it was tempered by a new, unfamiliar feeling agency. Following Juliana's instructions, she took the expensive leather-bound notebook intended for a wedding guest list and repurposed it as her war journal. She sat in the morning room, the rain still streaking down the glass panes, and began to write. At first her mind was blank, a canvas of pain. But then she started small, remembering a conversation from last Christmas at Alistair's ski lodge in Aspen. December 26th. Alistair was on a conference call in front of the fireplace. I brought him a brandy. He was laughing with someone on the phone. After he hung up, he was giddy. He kissed me and said, "The deal in Dubai is done. I had to pay our consultant an absolute fortune, but it's worth it." I asked who the consultant was. He just winked and said, "A very helpful little P.O. box in the Cayman Islands." He thought it was hilarious. He called it Nexus Dynamics Atlantic. The memory, innocuous at the time, now seemed sinister. She wrote it down, her handwriting shaky but clear. Another memory surfaced. A charity auction in New York 2 years ago. April 2 years ago. The Met Gala. Alistair was trying to get a zoning variance for a new data center. Senator Thompson was the keynote speaker. Alistair won the bidding on a terrible painting for $250,000. When we got in the car, I said it was a lot to pay for an ugly painting. He laughed and said, "I didn't buy a painting, I bought a zoning variance. The senator's favorite charity will be very grateful." She kept writing, the threads pulling loose from the tapestry of their life together. The offhand remark about the 3 different sets of books his accountants kept, one for me, one for my partners, and one for Uncle Sam. The time he'd boasted that his real net worth was an imaginary number, because so much of it was tied up in untraceable art and offshore holding companies designed to be invisible. Each memory was a small, sharp stone she was adding to her side of the scales. While Catherine mined the past, Eleanor was working the present. She sat in the formal living room, her posture perfect, her phone to her ear. Her conversations were masterpieces of subtlety. "Meredith, darling, how lovely to hear your voice," she cooed to the wife of Marcus Thorne, the most influential member of Nexus Dynamics' board of directors. "Yes, I'm staying with Catherine for a bit. She needs me. Oh, you know, Alistair is going through a difficult phase. It's so reminiscent of his father. You remember that terrible business with the younger woman? He became so erratic, so unpredictable. His judgment was impaired. It's heartbreaking to see the pattern repeat. One worries about the stability of things you know with the company. This Isabella Rossi, I've heard she encourages his worst impulses." She would pause, letting the poison seep in. "Of course I'm sure it's nothing. He's a brilliant boy. But a man with a pregnant wife at home making such rash decisions. It does make one wonder. Do give Marcus my best." She was not attacking. She was expressing concern. She was planting a seed of doubt, not in Alistair's morality, but in something far more important to a man like Marcus Thorne, his stability and, by extension, the security of his investment. The first counterattack from Alistair came 2 days later. Catherine's phone rang, and his face, a smiling selfie from their trip to Bali, flashed on the screen. Her heart leaped into her throat. Her first instinct, born of 4 years of conditioning, was to answer. Eleanor, who seemed to possess a sixth sense, walked into the room. "Don't," she said, her voice calm. "Let it ring." Catherine stared at the phone, her hand trembling as it rang and rang before finally falling silent. A text message immediately followed. "Catherine, pick up the phone. We need to talk. Don't be childish." Another came a minute later. "Are you seriously having my mother screen my calls? This is absurd. I will not have my personal life dictated by some overpriced lawyer. I am coming over." The message sent a jolt of pure terror through her. "He's coming," she whispered, holding the phone out to Eleanor. Eleanor read the text, and her lips thinned into a hard line. "Good," she said. "Let him." An hour later, the sleek black form of Alistair's McLaren supercar crunched up the gravel driveway. He got out dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking every inch the master of the universe returning to his castle. He strode to the front door and tried his key. It didn't fit. He tried it again, jamming it in with force. The sound of metal grating against the new lock was loud in the quiet house. He stepped back, a look of pure disbelief on his face, and pressed the doorbell, a long, angry buzz. Catherine and Eleanor stood in the foyer watching the video feed from the security camera on a tablet. Alistair's face, handsome and familiar, was twisted into a mask of rage. "Catherine!" he shouted, his voice muffled by the thick oak door. "Open this door right now! This is my house!" Eleanor calmly pressed the button for the intercom. "Alistair!" Her voice boomed out onto the porch, cool and clear. "You are no longer welcome here. This is Catherine's marital home." On the screen, Alistair looked as if he'd been slapped. "Mother, what in God's name are you doing? Let me in." "No," Eleanor's voice replied through the speaker. "You have made your choice. You chose to abandon your pregnant wife. You do not get to choose the consequences. If you have anything to say to Catherine, you can say it through her lawyer. Now please leave the premises before you are filmed trespassing." "My lawyer!" he roared, laughing, a bitter, ugly sound. "You think Juliana Hayes is going to scare me? I will bury you. I will bury both of you in legal fees. I will prove Catherine is an unfit mother. I will take my child." "You will do nothing of the sort." Eleanor interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "Your father tried this same pathetic bullying, Alistair. He tried to intimidate me, to threaten me. It was beneath him then, and it is beneath you now. You are behaving like a cornered animal, not the titan of industry you pretend to be. Leave." Catherine, watching, felt a surge of courage. She stepped forward and pressed the talk button herself. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear. "Leave Alistair. Speak to my lawyer." On the screen, his face registered pure shock. It was one thing to be defied by his mother, whom he considered a sentimental relic. It was another to be defied by Catherine, the woman he had deemed docile and disposable. He stared at the camera, his blue eyes burning with a cold fire. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel, stalked back to his car, and sped away, spitting gravel from his tires. Catherine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her legs feeling weak. Eleanor put a firm, steadying hand on her shoulder. "The first charge has been repelled," she said quietly. "Well done." The true counteroffensive landed the next day, not at their door, but in the heart of Alistair's empire. In his gleaming office overlooking Manhattan, Alistair was meeting with his lawyer, the smooth and unflappable Mr. Davies. "She's refusing to speak with me," Alistair raged, pacing in front of the windows. "They've changed the locks. My mother is in there with her, plotting against me." Mr. Davies, a man who specialized in quiet, orderly dissolutions, looked uncomfortable. "Alistair, I warned you that this approach was aggressive. It was bound to provoke a reaction." "It's a negotiation tactic," Alistair snapped. "She'll fold." Just then, Davies' assistant entered, carrying a box so thick with paper it looked like a ream of printer stock. "This just arrived by courier for you, Mr. Davies, from the offices of Juliana Hayes." Davies opened the box. His calm, professional demeanor began to dissolve as he lifted out the first document. It was a single-spaced, 200-page request for financial discovery. It demanded everything. Every personal and corporate tax return for the last 10 years, every bank statement from every account, domestic and international, every stock transaction, every email related to the formation of any shell company or trust, full documentation on the purchase of all art and property, including the consulting fees for the Dubai deal and the donation to Senator Thompson's charity. It was a legal shock and awe campaign. It was an invoice for the war to come. Davies paled. He looked up at his client, the bravado gone from his face. "Alistair," he said, his voice grim, "this is not a negotiation tactic. She's not trying to get a better settlement." He held up the massive document. "She's trying to get your entire company." Alistair reacted to Juliana's aggressive financial inquiries with full-scale warfare. His legal team swiftly filed motions to block the subpoenas, labeling them frivolous harassment. Simultaneously, Alistair weaponized the media against Catherine. A scathing tabloid article depicted her as a ruthless gold digger exploiting her pregnancy for money. Photographers and surveillance vehicles lingered outside her home, escalating her stress and anxiety. Eleanor, ever composed, shielded Catherine fiercely. "He wants you to crumble," she counseled, strengthening Catherine's resolve. "Your strength is your greatest asset." Amidst sleepless nights, Catherine's meticulous journaling revealed a pivotal memory: their third anniversary trip to St. Bart's. Alistair had shown her a corporate structure labeled Project Chimera, boasting it was an untraceable Liechtenstein foundation holding Nexus Dynamics' most valuable patents. Catherine recalled his chilling remark clearly. "It's legal if you can afford the lawyers to make it legal." When Catherine shared this crucial discovery, Eleanor immediately arranged a secure call with Juliana Hayes. "Project Chimera," Juliana repeated sharply, excitement evident in her voice. "Liechtenstein means secrecy, tax evasion, asset hiding, corporate fraud. This could escalate beyond divorce court to criminal charges." Catherine hesitated, troubled by the idea of Alistair facing prison. "He built this trap himself," Eleanor gently reminded her. "Not you." "Precisely," Juliana interjected. "This is leverage. If Alistair fights disclosure, he risks contempt of court. Compliance reveals the fraud. Plus, this revelation will terrify his board, turning his personal scandal into corporate catastrophe." Armed with this powerful insight, Juliana swiftly amended their legal filings to specifically target Project Chimera. Alistair's facade was finally unraveling. Within 24 hours, Juliana filed a precise, devastating motion with the court. It detailed the existence of Project Chimera, a Liechtenstein foundation hiding Nexus Dynamics' core intellectual property. The implication was clear: Alistair had committed corporate fraud. Alistair Finch stared at the document, stunned. "How could they know?" he asked desperately, looking at his shaken lawyer. "I don't know, but they do," Davies responded gravely. "This isn't a bluff. If a judge grants this motion, and they likely will, we must either produce evidence that reveals your fraud or face contempt of court." "Stop it," Alistair ordered. "Appeal delay, do something." Davies shook his head firmly. "It's too late. Juliana Hayes has cornered you perfectly. This isn't divorce law. It's criminal territory now." Across town, Eleanor Finch executed her final strategic move. At a discreet lunch with Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Nexus Dynamics board, she expressed grave concern about Alistair's reckless actions, subtly dropping mentions of Liechtenstein. That evening, Marcus called an emergency board meeting, confronting Alistair with Juliana's motion. "Did you really think you could hide assets from us? Project Chimera puts the entire company at risk." The board swiftly stripped Alistair of his power and launched a forensic audit. His personal life unraveled just as quickly. Isabella Rossi, his lover, coldly dismissed him, branding him a toxic liability. Shattered and alone, Alistair saw clearly that only one option remained: total surrender. The next morning, his assistant called the Greenwich house. "Mr. Finch requests a meeting with Mrs. Bell," she said timidly. "At her convenience." Eleanor glanced at Catherine, visibly pregnant and resolute. "Tell Mr. Finch she will meet him here tomorrow at noon." Catherine sat calmly in the sunlit morning room as Alistair entered, defeated and humbled. "I'm sorry," he began weakly, but Catherine stopped him sharply. "You're sorry you got caught. Juliana's terms are final." He read the brutal conditions. Catherine receives the Greenwich estate outright, and $200 million in a trust for Catherine and their child, controlled exclusively by Catherine. Catherine has full custody. Alistair allowed supervised visits only after extensive therapy. Alistair publicly retracts defamatory stories about Catherine. Details of Project Chimera sealed permanently, conditional on his compliance. "My child," Alistair pleaded desperately. You called our child a complication, Catherine responded coldly. This agreement ensures you won't hurt us again. Sign or lose everything. Defeated and knowing his fate, Alistair quietly nodded. You'll have it today. As he left, Catherine realized the battle was over. She had reclaimed control of her life, emerging stronger and surrounded by true family. The Alistair Finch, who approached the house, bore little resemblance to the confident millionaire who had abandoned Catherine months earlier. His sharp features were softened by defeat, his tailored suit now ill-fitting, as if the man inside had shrunk. Catherine watched him enter the morning room, sunlight framing her calm expression as she rested a hand protectively on her rounded belly. Eleanor stood silently beside the fireplace, her presence resolute. Catherine, Alistair began, his voice strained. Thank you for seeing me. She nodded slightly, her composure unwavering. The shift in power was clear. She was in control and he was here to plead. I'm sorry, he stammered, his gaze faltering under her steady eyes. For how I told you what I said, everything. I wasn't thinking clearly. She raised a hand, gently stopping him. You're sorry because you got caught, Alistair, not because you hurt me. He visibly flinched, the blunt truth piercing his practiced facade. She let the silence linger before calmly sliding a single sheet of paper toward him. Juliana drafted these terms. They're not negotiable. Alistair's hands trembled as he read. The house Catherine would retain the Greenwich estate debt-free. The settlement $200 million placed in a trust controlled solely by Catherine and Juliana Hayes for their child's future. Custody. Catherine would have exclusive custody. Alistair would only receive supervised visitation rights after completing 1 year of professional therapy. Public retraction. Alistair would publicly withdraw all defamatory claims against Catherine. Silence. In return for his agreement, details of Project Chimera would remain confidential. Alistair looked up, color draining from his face. Catherine, please, my child, you can't. You called our baby a complication. You were ready to discard us, Catherine replied steadily. I learned family for you was disposable. This agreement protects my family from you. You'll provide for your child materially, but your influence stops there. Sign it or risk everything. He glanced toward Eleanor, searching for sympathy, but finding none, only silent judgment. Realizing he had no leverage, Alistair gave a broken nod. You'll have it signed by my lawyers today, he said quietly, rising and leaving without another word. 6 months later, the morning room had transformed from a battlefield into a warm, inviting nursery filled with soft colors and gentle laughter. Catherine rocked gently, cradling her daughter, named Eleanor, Catherine Finch Ellie. The elder Eleanor stepped into the room, her stern demeanor softened into joyful grandmotherly warmth. "How's our angel?" she whispered, brushing a kiss across the baby's forehead. "Perfect," Catherine replied softly, smiling up at the woman who had become her strongest ally and closest family. Occasional news trickled in about Alistair. He had avoided prison, but his empire had collapsed. Isabella Rossi moved on, leaving him completely alone. Catherine felt no anger, no sadness, only calm indifference. Alistair was a closed chapter. Looking around the sunny nursery at her peaceful child and the loyal woman beside her, Catherine knew she'd gained something infinitely richer than Alistair's fortune. Strength, resilience, and the bond of family forged in the fiercest fire. From the ashes of a shocking betrayal, Catherine Bell didn't just rise. She soared. With her mother-in-law Eleanor as her unexpected ally, she turned a story of heartbreak into an epic tale of justice and empowerment. They took on a ruthless billionaire and his army of lawyers and proved that true strength isn't about the money in your bank account, but the courage in your heart and the loyalty of those who stand with you. This was more than a divorce. It was a revolution. The water in Alistair Finch's infinity pool was the color of a billionaire's dream, a shimmering, impossible turquoise that bled into the California sky. But dreams can drown. When Genevieve Dubois, Alistair's brilliant and beautiful partner, vanished after a vicious fight, he told police she just needed space. Days later, while the search was still on, the music at his estate was blasting. Champagne flowed as his new lover, Portia Montgomery, played hostess to a lavish pool party. It was a brazen spectacle of wealth and indifference, until the sirens cut through the laughter and police began to drain the water, searching for a truth everyone feared was at the bottom. The fight, like all their fights, had started over something small and ended with the world cracking open. It was a Tuesday night in the Oak Haven Hills, an enclave of obscene wealth and paranoid privacy nestled in the canyons above Los Angeles. From their glass-walled fortress, Alistair Finch and Genevieve Dubois could watch the city glitter below like a carpet of fallen stars, a universe away from the silent, suffocating perfection of their lives. This time, the catalyst was a painting. Genevieve's painting. It was a chaotic swirl of deep indigos and violent slashes of crimson, a piece she'd titled Escape Velocity. Alistair, a man who built his empire on the clean, predictable lines of venture capitalism, hated it. "It's aggressive, Jen," he'd said, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. He wasn't looking at the canvas, but at its reflection in the panoramic window, as if the art itself was too unrefined for his direct gaze. "It doesn't match the aesthetic." "It's not supposed to match the aesthetic." Alistair, Genevieve replied, her voice low and tight. She was wiping her turpentine-stained hands on a rag, her slender frame tense. At 34, she still possessed the fiery spirit of the art student he'd met a decade ago, but it was banked now, smothered under layers of couture and compromise. It's supposed to feel something, and what it feels is chaotic, uncontrolled. He finally turned to her, his smile not reaching the cold calculation in his gray eyes. It was the smile he used on corporate boards before a hostile takeover. "I've invited the board of Arion Dynamics for dinner on Friday. I was thinking we'd hang the Rothko in its place. It's more conducive to billion-dollar conversations." The condescension was a physical blow. The Rothko wasn't a Rothko. It was his Rothko, an investment. Her painting was her soul, and he wanted to replace it with a balance sheet. "No," she said the word, a small hard stone in the vast minimalist space. Alistair's smile tightened. No, it stays. The board can look at it and feel something for once in their lives." That was the spark. The argument that followed was a well-rehearsed tragedy. It spiraled from the painting to her lack of gratitude to his obsession with control to her friends he deemed unworthy to the woman he was seeing on the side, a sleek, ambitious lawyer named Portia Montgomery, whom everyone knew about but no one dared mention. Genevieve had thrown that name into the air, and it had hung there, a poisonous vapor. "Don't you dare!" Alistair had warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He took a step closer, his 6'3" frame eclipsing her. "Don't you dare bring her into this house." "She's already in this house," Genevieve had screamed, her voice finally breaking. "She's in our bed. She's in your head. She's in every single lie you tell me when you come home smelling of a perfume that isn't mine." The final ugly words were swallowed by the slamming of the solid oak studio door. Genevieve had stormed out, grabbing only her car keys and her worn leather handbag. Alistair, left alone in the cavernous living room, had watched the taillights of her vintage convertible snake down their private mile-long driveway until they were just another pair of red dots swallowed by the city's glow. He took a sip of his scotch, straightened his tie, and went to bed. He called the police 48 hours later. Detective Marcus Thorne felt a prickle of disdain the moment he stepped into the Finch estate. It wasn't just the opulence, the soaring ceilings, the museum-quality furniture, the sheer audacious scale of it all. It was the sterility. The house felt less like a home and more like a high-end showroom where no one was allowed to touch anything. Alistair Finch was the picture of concerned distress. He was dressed in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed. He wrung his hands at the appropriate moments, and his voice was thick with what sounded to the untrained ear like fear. We had a quarrel, Alistair explained, seated on a white sofa that probably cost more than Thorne's car. A stupid argument. She's passionate, you see. An artist. She gets overwhelmed. She's done this before. Takes off for a day or two to clear her head. Stays with a friend in Topanga, maybe gets a hotel by the beach. And you have the names of these friends, Thorne asked, his pen poised over his notepad. His partner, Detective Kim Holloway, a sharp woman half his age, was already scanning the room, her eyes missing nothing. Alistair waved a dismissive hand. A few. I can have my assistant compile a list. But honestly, Detective, she values her privacy, her independence. If she knew I'd called you, she'd be furious. He was trying to frame it as an overreaction, an invasion of her space, not a dereliction of his duty. She left her phone, Holloway noted from across the room. She was standing by a marble countertop where a single iPhone sat stark and silent. Her wallet, too. Credit cards, ID. The only thing missing is her handbag and the car keys. Thorne looked at Alistair. Is that normal, Mr. Finch? For her to leave with no phone, no money? Alistair's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only crack in his polished veneer. She can be impulsive. She likely has cash in her bag. She's an old soul like that. Thorne made a note. Impulsive. He looked around the vast, silent house. You said she drove off. We've put an APB out on her vehicle, a 1968 Mercedes 280 SL convertible silver blue. Correct. Yes, that's her baby, Alistair said with a sad, fond smile that felt utterly rehearsed. And you haven't heard from her at all. No texts, no calls, no cryptic emails. Nothing. The silence is deafening. Thorne stood up, his gaze drifting past Alistair through the floor-to-ceiling windows to the backyard. It was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, manicured lawns, and outdoor kitchen that rivaled most professional restaurants in the pool. The infinity pool was the centerpiece, a sheet of turquoise silk that seemed to pour directly into the canyon below. It was serene. Perfect. We'll do everything we can. Mr. Finch, Thorne said, his tone professional, betraying none of his internal suspicions. We'll check with the friends, monitor her bank accounts for any activity. Oh, wait, you said her wallet is here. We'll keep an eye out for the car. In the meantime, if she contacts you, you call us immediately. Of course, Detective. Thank you for your time. Alistair walked them to the door, a gracious host seeing off his guests. As they walked back to their unmarked sedan, Holloway broke the silence. He's lying. I know, Thorne said, starting the engine. The question isn't whether he's lying. It's what he's lying about. Over the next 5 days, the disappearance of Genevieve Dubois became a minor story in the relentless Los Angeles news cycle. Artist partner of venture capitalist Alistair Finch missing. Her photo was everywhere, a candid shot from a gallery opening, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with a light that seemed absent from the cold, sterile house she shared with him. Friends were interviewed. They all said the same thing: Jen was unhappy. Jen felt trapped. Jen was terrified of Alistair's temper. One friend, a sculptor named Maya, told Thorne that Genevieve had a secret bank account, a runaway fund, but a check of her financials showed it hadn't been touched in months. The car was found on day 4. It was parked legally on a quiet residential street in Venice Beach, miles from her usual haunts. It was clean. No signs of a struggle. Her handbag was on the passenger seat. Inside was a book of poetry and a half-eaten bar of dark chocolate. No cash, no keys, just the bag. Keys. Just. The discovery of the car without a body should have been a sign of hope, but to Detective Thorne it felt like a prop carefully placed on a stage. And then on Saturday, exactly 1 week after Genevieve Dubois had vanished into the night, the music started pumping from the Oak Haven Hills. Thorne got the call from a furious neighbor, a film producer whose own weekend tranquility was being shattered by the thumping bass. You won't believe this, the producer had seethed over the phone. The man's wife is missing, maybe dead, and he's throwing a goddamn rave. Thorne and Holloway drove back up the winding canyon road, not towards a crime scene, but towards a party. It was a vision of grotesque denial. Cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Teslas lined the private drive. Laughter and shrill voices echoed in the twilight air. As they approached the house, they could see the backyard. It was packed. Dozens of people, the young, beautiful, and wealthy of L.A., milled around the pool. Waiters in crisp white jackets served champagne. And in the center of it all, holding court like a king, was Alistair Finch. By his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm, was a stunning woman with raven black hair and a shark's smile. Portia Montgomery. She looked perfectly at home. Thorne felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a statement. This was a man so convinced of his own power that he believed he was untouchable. He looked at the pool, the water glowing under the submerged lights, its surface disturbed by the joyful splashing of intoxicated guests. He thought of the missing woman, the fake smile of her partner, the car left like a breadcrumb. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And Thorne had a sickening feeling that the answer was somewhere in that shimmering turquoise water. The music didn't just play. It pulsed. A deep synthetic heartbeat that vibrated through the flagstone patio, up through the soles of Detective Thorne's sensible shoes, and into his teeth. It was a soundtrack for oblivion, a frantic attempt to blast away any creeping sense of reality. As Thorne and Holloway walked through the wide-open glass doors into the backyard, a wave of expensive perfume and champagne-scented air washed over them. Young men in designer shirts that were artfully unbuttoned stood in tight clusters with women whose faces were smooth, emotionless masks of Botox and ambition. They laughed too loudly, their eyes darting around, constantly assessing who was watching them, who they should be talking to. It was a gathering of people who treated life as a transaction, and Genevieve's disappearance was just a piece of unfortunate market volatility. Alistair saw them coming. He was holding a champagne flute, leaning against the marble edge of the outdoor bar. Portia Montgomery was at his side, her red dress a slash of defiance against the cool blues and whites of the party's aesthetic. She whispered something in his ear, and his expression shifted from convivial host to irritated monarch. He met the detectives halfway, a practiced smile of annoyance on his face. "Detectives, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you find her? Is that why you're interrupting my gathering?" The choice of the word gathering was deliberate, an attempt to downplay the bacchanalian scene unfolding behind him. "No, Mr. Finch, we haven't found her," Thorne said, his voice flat and unimpressed. He let his gaze sweep over the partygoers, many of whom were now staring, their conversations faltering. "We're here because we received a complaint. And frankly, we're surprised. A man whose partner is the subject of a major missing persons investigation doesn't usually throw a party a week later." Alistair let out a short, humorless laugh. "This isn't a party, detective. It's a remembrance. A celebration of Genevieve's vibrant spirit. She wouldn't want us to sit around moping. She loved life. She loved people." It was the most audacious, self-serving lie Thorne had ever heard. He glanced at Portia, who stepped forward, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "Alistair was devastated, detective," she said, her voice a low, purring contralto. "I simply couldn't let him wallow in grief. We all process loss in our own way. Alistair is a man of action, of forward momentum. Staying positive, staying surrounded by life, it's how he copes." She placed her hand on Alistair's chest, a gesture of both support and ownership. "I see," Holloway said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "And you are Portia Montgomery?" "A friend of the family," she answered smoothly. The friend of the family, currently wearing a diamond necklace that belonged to the missing woman, Thorne thought. He'd seen the necklace in photos of Genevieve from a charity gala months earlier. It was a distinctive piece, a cascade of white gold and diamonds that he was sure hadn't been a gift to Ms. Montgomery. The brazenness was breathtaking. "Mr. Finch, we need to ask you and Ms. Montgomery to come down to the station to answer some more questions," Thorne stated, changing tactics. "There are inconsistencies in your timeline that need clarification." Alistair's face darkened. The mask of the gracious host slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. "That's not going to happen. Not tonight. My lawyer has advised me not to speak further without him present. I've told you everything I know. This is harassment. Is it? Thorne challenged, taking a step closer, lowering his voice so only the three of them could hear. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man who couldn't wait to replace his missing partner. It looks like a man celebrating his newfound freedom. Alistair's eyes blazed with fury. You are on my private property. I'm asking you to leave. Now. We'll leave, Thorne said calmly. But we'll be back. He looked past Alistair, his eyes settling on the pool. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water. The turquoise surface, once so inviting, now looked dark and secretive. We just need to make a stop at a judge's house first. Portia's perfectly sculpted composure flickered. A knot of anxiety tightened in her expression. A judge. For what? A warrant. Holloway supplied her gaze, locking onto Portia. A warrant to search this entire property. Every room, every closet, every inch of the grounds. She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. And to drain the pool. The silence that fell between them was more profound than the thumping music. Alistair's face went rigid. It wasn't the explosive anger Thorne had expected, but something colder, more terrifying. It was the look of a man whose meticulous calculations had just been thrown into chaos by an unpredictable variable. You have no grounds, Alistair hissed. I have a missing woman who left behind her phone and wallet, Thorne countered, ticking the points off on his fingers. A car abandoned miles from her home. A partner with a history of a volatile temper, according to friends. A brand new girlfriend wearing what appears to be the missing woman's jewelry. And a party that looks a hell of a lot like a victory celebration. I think a judge will find that more than sufficient grounds for probable cause. Portia's hand, still on Alistair's chest, was trembling slightly. Her eyes were wide with a fear she could no longer conceal. She looked from Alistair to Thorne, then at the enormous, glittering pool behind them. The laughter of the guests suddenly sounded shrill and distant, like ghosts at a feast. Alistair Finch, the man who controlled boardrooms and markets and people, was no longer in control of his own home. He stared at Thorne, his mind clearly racing, cycling through threats, bribes, and legal maneuvers. But he could see the implacable resolve in the detective's eyes. This wasn't a negotiation. Get out, Alistair said again, but this time the words lacked their earlier force. They were brittle, desperate. We're going, Thorne confirmed. He turned his back on them, a deliberate act of dismissal. But we'll see you again in a few hours, Mr. Finch. Don't go anywhere. As he and Holloway walked away, the music seemed to falter. A DJ, sensing the shift in mood, faded the track. The vibrant, pulsating heart of the party was slowing, dying. The chatter of the crowd devolved into nervous whispers. All eyes were on Alistair and Portia, who stood frozen by the bar, illuminated in the cold, unforgiving light of the approaching dusk. The party was over. Driving back down the canyon, Holloway broke the silence. The necklace. You really think it was hers? I'd bet my pension on it. Thorne said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't just replace her. He's re-gifting her life. He felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Alistair's arrogance was going to be his downfall. He had handed them the justification they needed on a silver platter served with champagne and contempt. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that they weren't just searching for a missing person anymore. When they returned and when the water level in that perfect turquoise pool began to drop, they were going to find a body. He was sure of it. The only question left was whose. Night had fully descended by the time the caravan of official vehicles returned to the Finch estate. The transition was jarring. The last of the party guests, a confused and disgruntled herd of socialites, were still filing out their expensive cars, forming a reluctant exodus down the long driveway. They were replaced by the stark, impersonal presence of the LAPD 2 marked patrol cars, the detective's sedan, and a large, unmarked van from the Forensic Services Unit. The house, moments before a stage for defiant celebration, was now a crime scene. Yellow tape, stark and clinical, was being unspooled, cordoning off the entire backyard. The festive string lights that hung over the patio now cast a sickly, interrogative glow on the uniforms and serious faces of the officers. Alistair Finch and Portia Montgomery stood in the cavernous living room framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the methodical invasion. Alistair was on the phone, his voice a low, furious growl. He was talking to his lawyer, a man whose name was synonymous with getting the rich and powerful out of trouble. Portia stood rigidly beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The defiant fire in her eyes had been replaced by a brittle, flickering panic. The diamond necklace was gone from her throat, likely tucked away in a desperate, belated act of discretion. Detective Thorne presented the signed warrant to Alistair, who snatched it from his hand without a word. As Alistair scanned the document, his knuckles white. Thorne's attention was already outside. A heavy-duty pump was being unloaded from the forensic van, its thick hoses snaking across the manicured lawn towards the edge of the infinity pool. "You're really going to do this?" Portia's voice was barely a whisper. "You're going to tear this place apart based on a feeling we're going to follow the evidence," Ms. Montgomery Holloway corrected her coolly, "or the lack thereof. A missing woman of her means doesn't just fall off the face of the earth without leaving a digital or financial footprint. Her entire life just stopped. Right here." Holloway's gaze drifted toward the dark water. The pump coughed to life with a loud industrial roar, shattering the canyon's silence. It was a sound of finality. A large hose submerged with a splash and water began to churn near the surface, before being sucked away, carried by another hose to a drain-off point down the hillside. The draining of the Finch pool had begun. The process was agonizingly slow. The pool was immense, holding tens of thousands of gallons of water. For the first hour, the change was almost imperceptible. The water level dropped by mere inches, the turquoise surface still placid and undisturbed under the glare of portable floodlights that the forensic team had set up. Thorne used the time to direct a preliminary search of the house. Officers, gloved and methodical, began in Genevieve's art studio. It was a space that felt distinctly different from the rest of the house. It was messy, vibrant, and alive. Canvases in various states of completion were stacked against the walls. Jars bristling with brushes stood on paint-spattered tables. And there, on the central easel, was Escape Velocity, the painting that had started the final fight. In the harsh light of the police flashlights, the slashes of crimson looked like fresh wounds. Holloway found something tucked into the frame of a large, empty canvas. It was a small, folded piece of paper. A receipt. Not for art supplies, but for a burner phone purchased with cash 2 weeks before Genevieve disappeared. "Our old soul was getting modern," Holloway murmured, bagging the receipt. Meanwhile, outside the pool continued to drain. The water level was noticeably lower now, exposing a line of pristine white tile that had been submerged. The top steps of the shallow end emerged glistening and bare. With every inch the water receded, the tension on the patio tightened like a screw. Alistair had ended his phone call and now stood with Portia and a newly arrived grim-faced lawyer in a tailored suit. They watched the proceedings with a mixture of contempt and terror. Thorne stood at the edge of the deep end, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the water, as if he could will it to reveal its secrets. Every bubble that rose to the surface, every ripple from the pump's vibration made his heart kick. He had staked his professional judgment on this. He had pushed for the warrant, convincing a skeptical judge that this flamboyant act of denial by Finch was more than just poor taste. It was the cover-up of a crime. If they found nothing, his credibility would be shot, and Alistair's lawyers would have a field day with a harassment lawsuit. 2 hours became 3. The water was now halfway down. The sleek built-in loungers in the shallow end were fully exposed, looking like skeletal remains. The pool's submerged lights began to poke through the surface, casting eerie upward-facing beams into the night sky. The roar of the pump was a constant mechanical drone. One of the uniformed officers pointed. "Detective, look." Thorne followed his gaze. Something was becoming visible in the deepest part of the pool, directly below the diving board. At first it was just a dark amorphous shape against the pool's light blue floor. As the water level sank lower, the shape began to resolve. It was large, dark, and irregular. Alistair took an involuntary step forward, his lawyer putting a restraining hand on his arm. Portia let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The pump kept roaring. The water receded further. The shape became clearer. It wasn't soft. It wasn't a body wrapped in a tarp as Thorne had morbidly pictured. It was hard-edged metallic. And then a recognizable form emerged from the distorting lens of the remaining water. It was the corner of something large and rectangular. It was covered in a dark, heavy-duty canvas, crudely weighted down by several large decorative stones that Thorne recognized from the landscaped garden beds nearby. The forensic team leader, a man named Diaz, gave the signal. The pump was shut off. The sudden deafening silence was more jarring than the noise. In that silence, all that could be heard was the distant hum of the city and the frantic pounding of Thorne's own heart. Two officers, wearing waterproof waders, carefully descended the pool steps and sloshed through the knee-deep water towards the object. The water lapped against the sides of the canvas-covered shape. Thorne held his breath. This was it, the moment of truth. One of the officers reached the object, his gloved hands hesitating for a moment before gripping a corner of the heavy, wet canvas. He looked back at Thorne, who gave a sharp, decisive nod. With a deep breath, the officer pulled. The canvas, heavy with water, peeled back with a sucking sound. The floodlights hit the exposed surface. It wasn't the pale, tragic face of Genevieve Dubois. It was the deep, violent indigo and brutal crimson slashes of her painting, Escape Velocity. And submerged beneath it, pinned to the floor of the pool, was something else entirely. It was a man. Dressed in a dark security guard's uniform, his eyes wide open in a permanent state of surprise, a neat, unmistakable bullet hole in the center of his chest. The discovery of the body in the pool didn't just change the investigation, it detonated it. The man was quickly identified as Frank Miller, a 58-year-old retired cop who worked for the high-end security firm that patrolled Oakhaven Hills. He was the guard on duty the night Genevieve disappeared. His logbook, found in the security booth at the entrance to the private road, showed he'd checked in Alistair Finch upon his return earlier that evening. The last entry was at 10:15 p.m., a routine, all clear. Genevieve had stormed out around 11:00 p.m. The cause of death was obvious even before the coroner's report. He had been shot. The pool wasn't just a hiding place, it was a tomb, and Genevieve's painting her soul on canvas had been used as a shroud. The question that hung in the cold night air was as chilling as it was confounding. Where was Genevieve Dubois? And how did a security guard end up shot dead at the bottom of her swimming pool? Alistair Finch's composure finally catastrophically shattered. When Thorne confronted him with the identity of the dead man, Alistair's face went slack with what looked like genuine shock. Frank. Dead. No. No, that's impossible, he stammered, his eyes wide. He was a good man. He worked here for years. He was on duty the night Genevieve left. Thorne said, his voice like ice. And now he's dead in your pool and she's gone. You're going to have to do a lot better than impossible, Mr. Finch. Alistair, Portia, and their lawyer were immediately separated and taken downtown. The house was now under the full control of the forensics team. They worked through the night, the property glowing under the floodlights like a film set for a horror movie. The preliminary findings were baffling. The bullet that killed Frank Miller was from a .22 caliber pistol, a small, easily concealable weapon. A search of the house revealed Alistair owned several firearms, all large-caliber hunting rifles and shotguns, all locked securely in a gun safe to which he alone knew the combination. There was no .22 registered to him or Genevieve. The painting Escape Velocity was carefully lifted from the pool. Beneath it, the forensics team found a single shell casing. But something else lay near the body, partially hidden by one of the victim's hands. It was a small silver object tarnished by the chlorinated water. A key. Not a car key or a house key, but a small, old-fashioned skeleton key. In a sterile interrogation room under the hum of fluorescent lights, Portia Montgomery's carefully constructed facade crumbled into a million pieces. Faced with a potential accessory to murder charge, her loyalty to Alistair evaporated. "I didn't know anything about a body," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Alistair told me Genevieve just left. He said she was unstable, that she'd had a breakdown." "And the party?" Holloway asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Whose idea was that?" Portia sobbed, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "His. It was all his idea. He said it was the best way to control the narrative. To show everyone he wasn't worried that he was the wronged party. He said if he acted like a victim, the press would eat him alive, but if he acted like he was moving on, they'd just call him a cad and focus on finding her." "And the necklace?" Holloway pressed. "He gave it to me that afternoon," Portia admitted, her voice dropping to a shameful whisper. "He said Genevieve had left it behind, and that she didn't deserve to wear it anyway. He said it looked better on me. I was a fool. I know I was a fool." Alistair, in a separate room with Thorne and his lawyer, was a wall of furious denial. He claimed he had no idea how Frank Miller ended up in his pool. He stuck to his story. Genevieve had stormed out after their fight, and he hadn't seen her since. The party was, as he'd claimed, a way to project strength. "So you're saying an armed security guard was shot on your property, dragged to your pool, and dumped in all without you hearing a thing?" Thorne asked, incredulous. "This house is soundproofed. I was in my bedroom on the other side of the estate. I took a sleeping pill. I heard nothing." Alistair spat back. "And the painting? Why use her painting to hide the body?" Alistair's eyes flickered for a moment. "I have no idea. Maybe the killer hated her art as much as I did." The callousness of the remark was chilling. The investigation was now a Gordian knot. They had a victim, a murder weapon they couldn't find, and a prime suspect who was either a Machiavellian genius or the unluckiest man in the world. And they still had a missing woman. Was Genevieve a second victim, her body dumped elsewhere? Or was she somehow the killer? The idea seemed preposterous. But the burner phone receipt suggested she was planning something. The breakthrough came from the one person who knew Genevieve's soul better than anyone, her friend the sculptor Maya. When Thorne and Holloway visited her studio in Topanga Canyon, a chaotic, welcoming space that smelled of clay and incense, she was pale with grief and fear. They showed her a photo of the skeleton key found in the pool. Her eyes widened. "I've seen it before," she said, her voice trembling. Jen wore it on a thin silver chain around her neck. She never took it off. She said it was her escape key. Escape from what? Holloway asked. Maya hesitated, twisting a piece of clay in her hands. From him. From Alistair. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a real key. She led them to a large, abstract metal sculpture in the corner of her studio. She pointed to a small, almost invisible seam near the base. She was a genius, you know. Not just with paint. With everything. Maya worked her fingers into the seam and pulled. A small, perfectly concealed door swung open. Inside the hollow base of the sculpture was a small metal lockbox. Maya looked at the detectives. "She told me if anything ever happened to her, if she ever disappeared, and I felt in my gut that something was wrong, I should open this. She said the key was the one thing Alistair could never take from her." Holloway took the skeleton key, which had been carefully cleaned and bagged, and inserted it into the lock. It turned with a soft metallic click. She lifted the lid. Inside there was no confession, no diary, no smoking gun in the traditional sense. Instead, there was a stack of professionally printed credit cards and a pristine California driver's license. The photo was of Genevieve, but her hair was cut short and dyed a mousy brown. The name on the documents was not Genevieve Dubois. It was Amelia Shaw. Beneath the documents was a burner phone, the one from the receipt, and a thick file folder. Holloway opened it. It was filled with what looked like financial statements, offshore bank records, and encrypted transaction logs. They were all under Alistair's name, but they were for accounts his lawyers would swear didn't exist. It was a meticulously documented portfolio of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering detailing how Alistair Finch had built a significant portion of his legitimate empire on a foundation of pure crime. And tucked into the back of the folder was a single sheet of paper. On it, in Genevieve's elegant handwriting, was a list of names. The first name on the list was Frank Miller. Beside his name was a note. He knows. He helped him. He's the first one I need to talk to. Genevieve Dubois hadn't had a breakdown. She hadn't been kidnapped or killed. She had been building a case. She had been planning to burn Alistair's entire world to the ground. And on the night she vanished, she had gone to confront the first domino she intended to knock over. The only question was, what happened when she did? The contents of the lockbox turned the case on its head. Genevieve Dubois wasn't a victim in the way they had imagined. She was a meticulous, patient hunter who had been stalking her prey for months, perhaps years. The file on Alistair was a work of art in its own right, a masterpiece of corporate espionage conducted from inside the gilded cage he had built for her. Detective Thorne spread the documents across the large table in the precinct's main briefing room. "She wasn't running away," he said to his team, a new respect for the missing woman in his voice. "She was preparing for war." The file detailed a complex web of shell corporations, illegal wire transfers, and insider trading that implicated not just Alistair, but several members of his company's board, the same men he'd wanted to impress by taking down her painting. Genevieve had somehow gained access to his encrypted servers, his hidden ledgers. She had everything. The note about Frank Miller was the key. Why did she need to talk to him? What did he know? A deep dive into Miller's financials provided the answer. For the past 5 years, Miller had been receiving a monthly payment of $10,000 from a holding company that the file revealed was secretly controlled by Alistair. It wasn't a salary. It was a retainer. It was hush money. The focus of the investigation shifted from Alistair as a potential murderer to Alistair as the head of a criminal enterprise. And Portia Montgomery, the ambitious lawyer, was suddenly viewed in a new light. How much did she know? Was she just a mistress, or was she the consigliere? When Holloway confronted Portia with the new evidence, her composure, already fragile, completely disintegrated. She had been played just as much as everyone else. Offshore accounts fraud. She asked, her face pale with disbelief. No. Alistair is aggressive in business, but he's not a criminal. He's too smart for that. He's smart enough to have a bagman on his security detail. Holloway countered, sliding a copy of Frank Miller's bank statement across the table, and smart enough to get his girlfriend to host a party for him while a dead body decomposes in his pool. The question is, are you smart enough, Ms. Montgomery, to save yourself? Portia stared at the numbers, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She had hitched her wagon to a man who wasn't just a philanderer, but a major felon. Her legal career, her reputation, her entire future was about to be incinerated. The night she left Portia, began her voice barely a whisper. Alistair called me. He was frantic. Not the cold, in-control man I knew. He was terrified. He said, "She knows. I don't know how, but she knows everything." He told me to come to the house, but to park down the street and come in through the back gate. What time was this? Around midnight. When I got there, he was in the backyard by the pool. He was drenched in sweat. He told me Genevieve had confronted him, that she had proof of business dealings. He said she threatened to ruin him. And then he said she just left. Did you believe him? Portia shook her head. No. There was something in his eyes. He kept looking at the pool. The pieces were beginning to fit, forming a dark and twisted picture. Thorne and Holloway theorized a new timeline. The fight over the painting was just the prelude. The real confrontation happened later. Genevieve, armed with her evidence, had finally shown Alistair her hand, telling him she was going to expose him. In his rage and panic, he had lashed out. But that didn't explain Frank Miller. The answer came from an unlikely source, a motion-activated security camera on the property of the film producer who had called in the noise complaint. His property overlooked the Finch estate from above. His cameras, designed to catch coyotes or intruders, had a clear if distant view of Alistair's backyard. The producer, eager to help nail his obnoxious neighbor, gladly handed over the footage. Thorne and Holloway watched the grainy black and white video in a darkened room. The timestamp in the corner of the screen provided an objective silent witness. At 11:05 p.m., they see Genevieve's Mercedes convertible driving away down the long driveway. Alistair's story so far held up. For the next hour, nothing. The patio is empty, the pool still. Then at 12:15 a.m., a figure walks into frame. It's a man in a security uniform, Frank Miller. He walks to the edge of the pool and peers down into the deep end as if looking for something. He has a flashlight in his hand. A few moments later, a second figure emerges from the house. Alistair. He approaches Miller, and though there's no audio, their body language is tense. They are arguing. Alistair points towards the driveway, then back at the house. Miller shakes his head. Then the video shows something that makes Thorne's blood run cold. A third figure appears. She slips out of the shadows near the art studio, a place the camera barely reaches. She is slight moving with a quiet grace. It's Genevieve Dubois. She hadn't left. She had sent her car away or had someone else drive it and circled back. She approaches the two men who have their backs to her. She is holding something small in her hand. There's a flash so brief it's almost missed, and Frank Miller crumples to the ground. Alistair spins around his face a mask of horror. He sees Genevieve holding a small pistol. She says something to him, her expression cold and resolute. He backs away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The camera then shows Genevieve directing Alistair. He, looking utterly terrified of the woman he once dominated, helps her roll Miller's body onto a large canvas. The painting, and together under her armed supervision, they struggle to push the heavy shrouded corpse into the pool. It sinks slowly, grotesquely into the deep end. The final scene on the tape is the most chilling. Genevieve stands at the edge of the pool, the gun still in her hand. She looks at Alistair for a long moment, then turns and walks back into the shadows of the studio, disappearing from view. A few minutes later, Portia Montgomery appears, walking into a scene of a crime she didn't even know had been committed. Thorne leaned back in his chair, stunned. "My God," he whispered. "He wasn't lying. He is scared of her. He didn't kill anyone. He's an accessory." Holloway said, her voice grim. She made him help her cover it up. Genevieve Dubois wasn't a victim or a warrior for justice. She was a killer. She had gone there to confront Miller, her first domino, but the confrontation had turned deadly. She had executed him. And then she had implicated her husband in the crime, binding him to her not with love or law, but with a shared terrible secret. The party wasn't Alistair's idea of a celebration. It was an act of desperation, an attempt to create a veneer of normalcy over a foundation of terror, all under the direction of a woman who was now holding his entire life and his freedom in her hands. She hadn't vanished. She was hiding in plain sight, pulling the strings. And the police had no idea where she was. The video footage transformed Alistair Finch from a prime suspect into a hostage. When Thorne and Holloway confronted him with the tape, the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost pathetic. His blustering, arrogant demeanor dissolved, replaced by the raw, unvarnished fear of a man who had been living in a nightmare. His confession, when it came, was a torrent of panicked words. "She was going to kill me," he said, his voice trembling in the interrogation room. His lawyer sat beside him, silent and grim, knowing the best legal strategy was now full, unadorned cooperation. After she shot Frank, she pointed the gun at me. She was so calm. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It was like all the passion, all the anger, all the life had been boiled out of her, and all that was left was this cold purpose. He recounted the night's events from his perspective. The fight over the painting had been real, but it was just the surface. Later that evening, she had confronted him with the file. She laid out his entire criminal enterprise with chilling accuracy. She told me she didn't want the money, Alistair said, shaking his head in disbelief. She said she wanted to watch me lose everything. She wanted me to live the rest of my life with nothing. She said she was going to start with my accomplices, that she was going to dismantle my empire one person at a time, and she was going to make me watch. He confirmed she had arranged for a friend to drive her car to Venice to create a false trail while she hid in the studio waiting. Her target was Frank Miller. Why him? What did he do? Thorne asked. Alistair looked down at his hands. Years ago there was an incident. A business deal that went bad. Someone got hurt. A rival. Frank was on duty. He saw what happened. I paid him to keep quiet to make sure the official record was clean. Genevieve must have found the payment records. She knew Frank was my first sin. She said if she could make him talk, the rest would unravel. But Miller refused to talk. When Genevieve confronted him by the pool, he had laughed in her face, telling her Alistair's money was worth more than her threats. He had sealed his own fate. After she shot him, Alistair continued, she told me that this was the new arrangement, that I was now part of her plan. She made me help her hide the body. She said if I went to the police, she would produce a recording she'd made of me confessing to the murder. She said she'd tell them I killed Frank to silence him, and then she vanished, making it look like I had killed her too. It was my word against hers, and she had the gun. The next week had been torture. Genevieve was hiding somewhere in the vast house, moving silently through hidden passages and guest rooms he hadn't entered in years. She would appear at random, a ghost in her own home, to give him instructions. The call to the police, the script of what to say, even the party, it was all her idea. The party, Holloway asked, skeptical. She said it was a masterstroke. Alistair explained a flicker of his old admiration for cunning strategy in his eyes. She said no one would believe a grieving man would throw a party, so they wouldn't suspect he was being coerced. They would just think he was a monster. She wanted them to find the body. She wanted me to be the only one there, the obvious suspect. It was all designed to corner me, to make me so desperate I would have no choice but to do exactly what she said. Her plan was to use him, her puppet, to liquidate his illegal assets, transfer the clean money to an account of her choosing, and then she would disappear forever, leaving him to face the fallout from a murder he didn't commit, and a financial empire that was now a house of cards. The confession gave the police a clear picture of the killer, but they still didn't have her. The house was searched again, this time by a SWAT team from the wine cellar to the attic. They found a small makeshift living space in a forgotten staff suite in the basement, complete with blankets, bottled water, and energy bars. They also found a laptop wiped clean. But Genevieve was gone. She had slipped away while the house was being swarmed. They had Alistair's testimony, but it was the word of a compromised, terrified man. They needed Genevieve. They needed the murder weapon. The final piece of the puzzle came from Maya the sculptor. Racked with guilt, she called Thorne, her voice choked with tears. She called me, Maya cried. Jen called me from her burner phone. She's at the studio. My studio. She needs me to drive her to the airport. Stall her, Thorne commanded. Tell her you're on your way. Do not let her know you've talked to us. The raid on Maya's Topanga Canyon studio was silent and swift. Plainclothes officers surrounded the property, hidden amongst the eucalyptus trees and dense chaparral. Thorne and Holloway, wearing tactical vests, took the lead. They found her in the main workspace, standing next to the metal sculpture that had held her secrets. She was dressed in practical, anonymous clothing, jeans, a dark hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low over her mousy brown hair. The transformation from the glamorous artist to Amelia Shaw was complete. She held a small go bag in one hand. She didn't seem surprised to see them. She simply looked up, her face calm, her eyes holding a deep, weary sadness. She didn't run. It's over, isn't it? She said, her voice quiet. It is, Genevieve Holloway said softly. Genevieve looked at the sculpture, her hand resting on its cool metal surface. He took everything from me, she said, not to the detectives, but to the room, to the universe. my art, my spirit, my name. He tried to turn me into just another one of his possessions. I tried to build a case against him to do it the right way, but when I confronted Frank Miller and he just laughed, something broke. I realized the system Alistair owned would never convict him. To beat a monster, you have to become one. She then reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out the .22 caliber pistol. She didn't point it at them. Instead, she laid it carefully on a workbench next to a lump of clay. Her confession was in her surrender. As they cuffed her, Thorne looked at her, at the woman who had outplayed a master manipulator, who had committed murder with ice-cold precision, and who had orchestrated a week of pure psychological terror. He saw the artist, the victim, the strategist, and the killer all residing in one shattered soul. She had fought to escape the gilded cage, but in the end she had only managed to build a new one with bars made of iron and a sentence that would last a lifetime. The trial was a media circus, a lurid spectacle dubbed the Gilded Cage Killing by the press. It had everything: wealth, betrayal, and a murder captured on grainy surveillance footage. In exchange for his full testimony, Alistair Finch received a reduced sentence of 12 years for being an accessory to murder and for a litany of federal financial crimes. The man who once ruled a corporate empire from a glass fortress now spent his days in a concrete box. His company collapsed and his name a permanent synonym for ruin. Portia Montgomery, granted full immunity for her testimony, vanished from the public eye, her career derailed. Maya the sculptor was never charged and later created a powerful series of sculptures inspired by the events titled The Key and the Cage. Genevieve Dubois's defense tried to paint her as a victim of coercive control who finally snapped. But the jury saw the video, the cold calculation, the woman who had not just lost control, but taken it in the most final way possible. They found her guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, calling her actions a chilling perversion of justice, sentenced her to life in prison without parole. In the end, everyone lost. An innocent man was dead. Alistair lost his freedom, and Genevieve lost her soul. The house in Oakhaven Hills was sold, its infamous pool immediately filled in by the new owners. Sometimes Detective Thorne would drive through the canyons and think of Genevieve's words. To beat a monster, you have to become one. She had succeeded, but in the process created a tragedy far greater than the one she sought to escape. The story of Alistair Finch and Genevieve Dubois is a dark reminder that behind the shimmering facades of wealth and power, the human heart can be a very dark place. It's a story of how control can become abuse, how a cry for justice can become a quest for vengeance, and how the fight to escape one prison can lead you directly into another. They were both monsters locked in a dance of destruction, and their story ended the only way it could, in ruin. What did you think of this tragic story? Who do you think was the greater villain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.